Hi guys, today we're going to talk about probably the number one kind of scientific issue, if you will, that people use to justify their disbelief in the Bible. They mock the Bible, and that's the age of the universe, or the age of the earth. And of course, if you follow what most scientists say today, of course the Bible calls it science falsely so-called, the universe is about 14 billion years old, give or take a bit, somewhere between 13 and 14, 13.8 billion years. Now, most believers, if you believe the Bible and you happen to believe it literally, the believers on this are, as far as the earth is concerned, are kind of split into two camps. And so some of them believe that the earth is 6,000 years old. And others, they'll say it's not the earth that's 6,000 years old, it's man that's 6,000 years old, but earth could be a little older than that. Now, that's because of something we call the gap. And you can see that if you look with me over here in Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, the Bible says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And that's how the first day starts. So a lot of the believers, they'll say, basically, that's when God created earth, and then on the sixth day he created man. And we can tell how old man is. Now, this we all agree on. All believers agree that man, not necessarily the earth, that man has been here for 6,000 years. And the way we get that is simply from Genesis chapter 5. There's a couple other ways, but for simplicity here, Genesis chapter 5, you have a list of the patriarchs' ages. And the Bible tells you not only how long they lived, like over here, Adam lives 930 years. This is year zero, starting from basically the creation of man, but it tells you how old he was when he got his firstborn. Remember that basically Abel was killed, right? So with Adam, the Bible restarts with Seth basically, and he's 130 years old when he begets Seth, and then Seth is 235 when he begets Enosh, and on and so on. So the generations overlap, but because you have that data, you can actually tabulate it this way and calculate that there were about 1,656 years over here until the flood, since the creation of man. And that basically gives you 4,000 years before the cross, and we've been here 2,000 years after the cross. 4,000 plus 2,000, that makes 6,000 years for the existence of man. I believe that with all my heart. Of course, many people mock that, but I do believe that mankind is 6,000 years old. Now, most believers who do not believe in the gap, they figure, well, since man and the earth are created basically at the same time, then just the way man is 6,000 years old, the earth is also 6,000 years old. That is not the case in the Bible. And if you don't believe in the gap, that's fine. I don't consider you a heretic. I hope you don't consider me a heretic. But it's pretty clear and pretty easy to prove from the rest of the Bible that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth is the original creation. We don't know how long ago that was. And we learn from Ezekiel 28 and Jeremiah chapter 4 and a few other chapters that what happened in fact was this thing here, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, is a judgment on the rebellion of Lucifer. You see, God created first, before mankind, he created the angels. It was an angelic civilization headed up by the anointed cherub Lucifer, and he rebelled, and so God destroyed him. And that's why it's a snapshot, Genesis 1-2. It's like watching a movie, right? You have the introduction, and the next scene, all of a sudden, you see destruction. And you're supposed to understand that something happened between those two. So there's a gap over here between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. And that gap is the rebellion of Lucifer. But as far as we're concerned, for now, the Bible shows you what God had to do with that universe. He turned off the lights and destroyed it. And now the preparation for the recreation, the Bible says, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And then here's the first day, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, and he restores the creation in 6 days. So the earth is not necessarily 6,000 years old. Now, I'm going to say something everybody's going to agree on, whether you believe in the gap or not. I know that some people are accused of believing the gap because in the 19th century, early 20th century, they needed an excuse to basically compromise with science. That is not why I believe in the gap. Absolutely not. Okay, I reject evolution in all its forms. I don't believe in theistic evolution. I think it's a heresy that needs to be repented of. God created man directly. So it's not to compromise with science, because even though I believe in the gap, and even though many of us believe in the gap, we do not believe that the universe is 13.8 billion years old. I think that's absolutely silly. It's scientifically silly. It's untenable. And they're forced to come to those conclusions in order to accommodate for evolution. So basically, their religion, their religious view of the world, which is science falsely so-called, forces them to set up a framework which allows for billions of years, so you can claim that evolution happens, but it happens so slowly that we cannot observe it. As you saw, I did a video on Dawkins where basically he admits, as others, that evolution has never been observed. So we laugh at the idea of the Earth being billions of years old. That said, I'm going to show you some articles. This is going to be really interesting. Some scientific articles about that, and how basically Christians said, oh, watch out, that information might change soon. And sure enough, 3 years later, the information changed, just like the Christians warned. So it all starts with an article that appeared in the Forbes magazine, a pretty famous magazine, in 2016 by Ethan Siegel, and says, how do we know the age of the universe? And it's pretty informative if you want to understand how they get to that silly number. And he says, he basically admits, which is frank enough of him to admit, that there are basically only two good methods to arrive at the age of the universe. And he says one is better than the other. Okay, so really, that one method that they use has different components, and the intersection of those components yields something like 13.8 billion years old, but it's only one method, and it's based on a number of assumptions. Of course, it has to do with, they assume the Big Bang, which right there you can ask the question, well, how did the Big Bang start, right? But no matter, scientists don't they don't go there. I don't know why. Actually, I do know why, because they're afraid of saying that it's God. And they study basically the expansion rate of the universe. Now, that's a whole different issue on its own about the expansion rate. I believe that expansion is an illusion based on our point of view, but we can talk about that another time. But let's go on here. He basically says this: if we extrapolate infinitely, let me go here so make sure that's in your view. If we extrapolate infinitely far back, we'd reach a singularity where physics breaks down. So you take your expansion rate and you go back in time on your chart. He says we reach a place where there's no physics, basically. There's no gravity. The laws of physics don't stand anymore. So science cannot look at that point. So he says, with our modern understanding of the very early universe, we know that an inflationary state preceded the hot, dense Big Bang, and that inflationary state was of an indeterminate duration. So that duration, they don't even know how long it is. The 13.8 billion years comes after that. So when we speak of the age of the universe, he says, we're talking about how much time has passed since the universe could first be described by the hot Big Bang until the present day. So really, basically, it's older than what they even say, according to them. And the inflation, we don't know how much, that singularity point, we don't know how long it lasted. So science, and this is one of the problems of science, it's called, they assume a uniform rate of change. So basically, if you're looking at an XY graph, you study the slope and you assume that this was the rate of change over that period of time, and I can extrapolate back into time. But the problem with that is that you're assuming that the rate of change has always been the same. That is one of the major weaknesses of science. But they can't talk about that, because then they'd have to say we don't know really anything about the past. Looking back into the past, guys, is not as scientific as it sounds. It's a lot harder to do than with the hard sciences. Now, he says, under the laws of general relativity, if you have a universe like ours, and now he's going to assume that our universe is this way. All right? He writes those as if those are conditions of our universe, but they're actually assumptions. So here's what you're assuming. When they tell you at school and colleges that this is how old the universe is, they're assuming a number of things. They are assuming that there's a uniform density of the universe as far as matter and clusters on the largest scales. They're assuming it's principle of isotropy, that basically the same laws and general properties apply everywhere at all times in all locations of the universe. They assume that it's the same in all directions, and basically that the Big Bang occurred at all locations everywhere at once. Now, you got those for assumptions, like the French say, avec des si, on mettrait Paris en bouteille. You could put Paris in a bottle with ifs, right? You can do whatever you want with ifs. But those are all assumptions. Here's where we get. The universe is 13.81 billion years old with an uncertainty of just 120 million years. This means we're confident in the age of the universe to 99.1 accuracy, which is an amazing feat. All right, pause it a second. Yes, we get that 120 million years is a very small fraction of 13.81 billion years. Okay, we get that. But it's kind of like, so basically, you inflate the lie so much, and then you give yourself a margin of error that's gigantic. But you can fall back on saying, yeah, but it's a percentage of the big lie. Listen, a percentage margin of error of 120 million years, if you can make a mistake by 120 million years, you could make a mistake for a lot more than that. And as we're going to see, that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what happens. Look again, this is going to be important. Guys, 2016 now, this is not so long ago. He says we can confidently state that 13.81 billion years is the age of the universe with a very small uncertainty. It's an incredible feat of science, again. And he keeps repeating, this is just one method, which is pretty honest of the guy. That's the second time he says we can constantly assert that it's 13.81 billion years. In fact, here's how confident this guy is. And by the way, this is a PhD astrophysicist, author, and science communicator who basically teaches physics and astronomy at various colleges. I have won numerous awards for science writing since 2008 for my blog, Starts with a Bang. And he's got 2 books. Here's the third time he's going to tell you how sure he is of their calculation and what a feat of science it is. Ages of 12 billion years and up are very common. Now, that's kind of contradictory here, what he's going to say. But ages of, say, 14 billion years and over are unheard of. Although there was a period in the 1990s where ages of 14 to 16 billion years were often cited. So, okay, wait a second. Pause. So, they are heard of. In fact, not only 16 billion years, Answers in Genesis references places where the universe is 18 billion years, not just up to 16 billion years. He says it's unheard of, but then he says there was a period of time when they were often cited. How can you dismiss the entire 90s just like this? Now, we just went from 16 billion years to 12 billion years since the 90s, and we're 2019 as the date of this video. So basically, within 20 years, the scientists are telling us that the universe is 4 billion, not million, billion years younger than what we thought it was at the extreme ends. And if you go to the 18 billion years, which they cite, now it's 6 billion years younger than what we thought. And of course, that's an improved understanding of stars, and their evolution has bumped these numbers down. Conclusion now. Our universe's age is between 13 and 14 billion years old. It wouldn't surprise anyone if we turned out to be as little as 13.6 or as much as 14 billion years old, or maybe even as little as 13.5 or as much as 14.1. But we're not. Look at the italics there. 13 or 15 billion years old. And we've determined that with extreme certainty. Say we're 13.8 billion years old with confidence, and now you know how we figured it out. What an incredible feat of science. What incredible. He says, listen, he says 13, 15, that's definitely, we're not in that bracket. Definitely, it's within that, basically. It's not going to hit 13, it's not going to hit 15. It's between 13.5 to 14.1, even though he just admitted ages of 12 billion years and up are very common. Now, Answers in Genesis has an article about that article, and they warn of certain things in their article. They say, first of all, it's important to note that the computed age for the universe depends upon the particular version of the Big Bang model that is assumed. If the model changes, the age changes. Well, they didn't tell you that. They make it seem like all scientists agree on exactly the same thing, which even if they did, it would just mean they're programmed the same way. All scientists agreed on a whole bunch of things in the past, and they've changed their mind big time. Now they're laughed at. Same thing with the age estimates of the universe within the Big Bang model. The age of globular clusters are model dependent. It's a secondary method basically to check that primary one. Here's the issues with the estimates. This sounds like a neat, tidy package, isn't it? How the age of the globular star clusters matches the expansion rate. The ages involved have changed over the years, though, they say. It was just a decade ago that the first precise age for the universe was announced using the first method that Siegel described. it was 13.7 billion years, 110 million years less than the current estimate, a difference roughly equal to the error in the currently claimed age. That probably is of no real consequence, but it does illustrate how the estimates change over time. Astronomers and astrophysicists probably will hone some of the data, such as the expansion rate, which in turn will alter the age estimate of the universe. For instance, from the early 1960s, he didn't take you there, the guy that wrote the Forbes article. But if you go back to the early 60s until the early 90s, the age of the universe was estimated to be 16 to 18 billion years old. Now we're down to, according to him, 13.8. So at least 4 billion years of change, at least. Notice that the range in this age estimate does not overlap with the current range of age estimate. The gap between the two ranges, 2 billion years. This is at the lower end. Many scientists are convinced that the current age estimate is correct, but there was equal confidence in older age estimates. Until a little more than 2 decades ago, the expansion rate of the universe was thought to be much lower than today. This lower expansion rate resulted in older age, of course. At that time, astronomers generally resisted a higher expansion rate, even though for years, a few astronomers had provided evidence for greater expansion rates. So that's Answers in Genesis, cautioning against the Forbes article over here, saying, whoa, easy. Those things change very fast and they may change soon. That was 2016. Guess what? Now in 2019. Here's an article with the title from The Insider. The universe is younger and expanding faster than we thought, a new study found. And we may need new physics as a result. 3 years after the other guy who was saying, you can confidently say it in italics, and it's not going to be any less than 13.5 billion years. No way, Jose. 14.1 max. It's a great feat of science. Go and say it confidently. 3 years later, also in April, this is 3 years later, the expansion rate is so much faster than what they thought. In fact, about 9% that they need new physics. And this is Nobel Prize winners that are going to talk about that. Nobel Prize winners. Look, Rees, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing his name, also calculated that the universe is between 12.5 billion and 13 billion years old, younger than the previous estimates of between 13.6 and 13.8. Here's a Nobel Prize guy saying it's between 12.5. Whereas Ethan Siegel, who's won many awards, was saying, let me remind you what he was saying. We're not 13 or 15 billion years old. And we've determined that with extreme certainty. Say we're 13.8 billion years old with confidence. And now you know how we figured it out. And then a Nobel Prize winner comes along. He says, actually, it's at least 1 billion years less. Or basically 1 billion years less. 1 billion years less. 3 years later, guys. So much so that scientists think we may have to work on new physics as a result. And I'll explain why in a second in the article. But recent other scientists think that the expansion rates concluded by both studies could be correct. So they're coming up with 2 different expansion rates. And they're basically saying we've looked at both studies that result in 2 different expansion rates. And there's no mistakes as far as we can tell in those studies. So either there's a mistake that nobody's able to figure out, or something has changed between then and now, that the expansion rate itself has changed. Remember what we were talking about, the uniformity of rate that's always assumed? And now all of a sudden they're saying, oh, maybe the rate changed. Rees said that the universe is outpacing all our expectations in its expansion, and that is very puzzling. So there's only one of 2 possibilities. NASA astrophysicist John Mather, we're making mistakes we can't find yet, or nature has something we can't find yet. Or, man, those guys, Nobel Prize winner, NASA astrophysicist, or both. Or both. But Rees downplayed the idea that the results could be the result of human error. He said that the mismatch between the 2 rates has been growing and has now reached a point that it is really impossible to dismiss as a fluke. He said that is not what we expected. No, we know. We read the Forbes article and how confident you are. This is not just two experiments disagreeing. We are measuring something fundamentally different. One is a measurement of how fast the universe is expanding today as we see it. Yes, right, as you see it. Didn't you guys tell us in school all the time that's all relative to the point of view of the observer? So why'd you laugh when the point of view of heaven is different than yours? That's assuming that what you're seeing is correct from your point of view. Oh, the hypocrisy of it all. The other is a prediction based on the physics of the early universe and on measurements of how fast it ought to be expanding. So you do a study, you say, well, that's how fast it ought to be expanding, and they can't find a mistake with that study. Then they do another study, and they realize that it's actually expanding faster, and they can't find mistakes with that study. Now what do? If these values don't agree, there becomes a very strong likelihood that we're missing something in the cosmological model that connects the two eras. It's looking more and more like we're going to need something new to explain this, he said. Using measurements captured through the Hubble telescope, Rees also calculated again that the universe is between 12.5 and 13 billion years old. Well, Mr. Ethan Siegel, I guess we're not so certain. Now, within 3 years, that thing changed. Maybe we'll talk about that another time, but the Bible says that the heavens are actually the vesture of God. So, if you're a microscopic speck on a vesture, and there is movement in the universe, from your point of view, I wish I could zoom this in more, but basically from your point of view, as I'm moving around, my shirt is moving around, there's going to be points in my shirt where the fabric is getting, those two folds are getting more distant than each other. And for an observer who's microscopic, it looks like the universe is expanding. But it's expanding here, but it's actually contracting here. And it's expanding here, but it's contracting here. It's expanding here, but it's contracting here. We're just too small to figure out the whole. So it's actually finite. It's not expanding. It's wrapping around like this and coming back. And some places contracting, some places expanding, which, by the way, affects your time measurements, as any good general relativist physicist understands and applies as a principle, except when it comes to your point of view from the Bible. Now, I just did that video because that's the number one thing that people use all the time to basically knock the Bible, just to show you how fast the science changes. We went from the 1960s, from 18 billion years to 12.5 billion years. That's 5.5 billion years changed in about 50 years, guys. In about 50 years. In 3 years, we changed by 1 billion. So don't tell me that you're so confident. I'll tell you what. I got a book that never changes, the Holy Bible. And at some period in the past, God created the heaven and the earth. I don't know how long ago. It certainly wasn't 13.8 billion years. That's absolutely silly. It's scientifically silly. If you want, you can go to Answers in Genesis and watch some of their videos there by astrophysicists, by astronomers who have PhDs, who are born-again Christians, and who'll tell you that's just scientifically untenable. The devil rebelled. I don't know how long that rebellion took place and for how long the earth was in that darkness and how long the earth was without form and void. But 6,000 years ago, God created man in 4000 BC. And that matches what I was taught in school. The dividing line between history and prehistory is the invention of writing. And basically, there is no true writing, provable. Now, I'm not talking about proto-writing. There's no true writing before 4000 BC for any civilization. Isn't that interesting how that matches with the Bible? Trust the Bible. Believe the book. Stop being intimidated by science, falsely so-called. God bless you. Thanks for listening. Listen, if you think that can help anyone's faith, please share it, please comment, and please pray for us. God bless you guys.